love a challenge, which is why when I saw this piece on Facebook Marketplace, I knew I had to get it and bring it back to life. I began by removing all of the drawers and then all of the copper drawer handles. I did equal parts of water and vinegar to make the cleaning process just a little bit easier because these were in rough shape. After the water comes to a boil, I let them soak for 10 minutes to soften up. Next, I drained off the excess water and let them soak in Barkeeper's Friend for another 10 minutes before I began scrubbing them. I polished all 18 drawer handles with a combo of a toothbrush and some steel wool. You can see the copper really started to shine through. This was quite the process, but it was really satisfying to see the copper come back to life. I'm not sure what these drawers had been used for in the past, but when I bought it, it still had all of these original labels left on it, so I tried to get as much of these off as I could. I then went in with citrus strip on all 18 drawers to try and remove the max amount of that horrible yellow paint. I then coated the base of the piece and let the citrus strip sit for a little over 30 minutes. Now, I know I could have probably had even better results if I had covered this with plastic wrap and let it sit for longer, but I was impatient. After the 30 minutes had passed, I then began scraping all of the drawers. Although the citrus strip didn't remove everything, it did a good job of getting the bulk of the paint. And it made my life a lot easier for sanding because less paint means less gunking of my sandpaper. After I finished scraping all the drawers and the body of the piece, it was time to move on to sanding. As I began sanding, I really didn't know what to anticipate underneath that paint. The top of the piece was actually in the worst condition of the whole thing, with a few dark stains that unfortunately I wasn't able to sand out. Thankfully though, this was only on the top of the piece. I didn't have any major staining on either side of the piece. You might be able to tell, but the cabinet was extremely unstable. It was wobbling the whole time I was sanding it, and I had to put my foot inside of it to keep it a little more stable, and even then, it was still very wobbly. At the final side of the cabinet, there were no major flaws except for the fact that at the top of the cabinet, there was two little areas that were pretty dished out, and they had yellow paint stuck in them. So unfortunately, I couldn't sand it out because it would have created even more of a divot. When I began sanding the front of the cabinet, I realized that the drawer dividers were hanging on by a thread, quite literally, because the vibration of the sanding was causing them to fall out. After I finished that, I then moved on to sanding all 18 drawers. And honestly, I was tired of this by about drawer 2. About half a dozen of the drawers broke apart in my hands as I was sanding them. That's how bad of shape they were in. Next, it was time to tackle my repairs. I went in with Norton's 2-part epoxy to fill in the divots, reinforce the nail holes, and go over all seams in the piece because it was so wobbly. Also, if anyone knows what those 2 divots on the top of the piece are from, please let me know in the comments. I'm very curious. I then sanded off all of the excess epoxy, which both left the piece looking better and it felt more stable. Next, it was time to conquer the inside of the piece. It is visible even when all the drawers are in there, so I knew I had to do something with it and there was no way I was going to sand it. So it was spray paint to the rescue. After removing all of the tape, which was quite satisfying, it was finally time to water pop the piece to prep it for stain. Since wood is like a sponge, the water opens up the grain of the wood and gives you a more even, rich stain application. Once I finished the base of the piece, I then also had to water pop all 18 drawers. Finally, it was time to stain. I went with Burger Seidler's Express Stain in the shade Old Oak, which is just a very classic, kind of antique-y looking brown. After I apply the stain and give it a little bit of time to sit, I then go back with a clean rag and wipe off any of the excess. Anyone who's done floors or woodworking projects knows that you definitely want to wear gloves for this part of the process because the stain will stain your arms and hands and it's very hard to get off. I then moved on to staining the body of the piece, which is where things really started to come together. I purposefully went with a little bit of a darker color because I knew I had those stains on the top of the piece that I wanted to at least be mostly covered by whatever stain color I chose, and thankfully this stain did a pretty good job of that. I then went in with a penetrating oil finish to give it that kind of antique-y look and really bring the piece to life. After I finished the base of the cabinet, I then moved on to coating all of the drawers. Similar to the stain, this penetrating oil needs to sit on the surface of the wood for a few minutes before you go back with a clean rag to wipe off any of the excess. But one key difference is that you do need to use a microfiber towel because you don't want to leave any particles behind in your finished product. Finally, it was time to reattach my freshly polished copper handles. At this point, it was hard to believe this was the same cabinet that I had started with. And finally, it was time to reassemble the cabinet. Can you believe this is even the same cabinet? Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you like this video, please subscribe to watch more transformations.